You are Locked On Tar Heels, your daily podcast on the UNC Tar Heels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
The hope for North Carolina for 2024-25 is that Harrison Ingram comes back to school and Carolina's roster has some consistency from this previous season. But if Harrison Ingram should leave, North Carolina doesn't want to get caught waiting around hoping that Harrison Ingram is going to leave and then they don't have any insurance behind him. Now, with some of the positions of need for Carolina this season, this offseason, I should say, you go ahead and you go out and you work at securing who that might be. Specifically for me, that is at the center position, the 5, because Armando Bacot's gone. And clearly, Carolina is looking at all sorts of leads there, as we've talked about. Another position I think Carolina should go ahead and be very, very actively looking to get someone in is at the 3 position. Obviously, again, there are people on the roster currently that might fit that role. But if you can get a dead-eye sharpshooter like a Cade Tyson that we've talked about, that's who you want to go procure. The positions, though, where you might need somebody, but you don't know, are shooting guard, the 2, and power forward, the 4. Why? Because Carolina is still waiting to see if they're going to have back RJ Davis and or Harrison Ingram. In both of those scenarios, you really want to start putting out some feelers in the transfer portal because if they're not back, we need a dude, right? So today, obviously, we're talking about Harrison Ingram. So I'd like to present to you an option that's Harrison Ingram insurance in the event that he doesn't return to Carolina next year. Per Inside Carolina, quote, UNC has done legwork on Kentucky transfer Adou Thiero, and multiple sources believe UNC would be in great position there if Ingram leaves, end quote. So ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Mr. Adou Thiero, whom we saw up close and personal last year and blocked Carolina 4 times. If you can't beat him, have him join you. So Adou Thiero, listed on Kentucky's roster last year at 6'8", 222 pounds. For reference, Harrison Ingram, who we're comparing him with, was listed last year on Carolina's roster, 6'7", 225. So literally just right in that same ballpark. Thiero just finished his sophomore year at Kentucky. Obviously part of the classes now that do not have COVID eligibility. So he has 2 years left remaining of college eligibility. Some stats from this past year, just to kind of catch up on what he has done. 25 games played, started 19 of them, 21.4 minutes a game, 7.2 points, 5 rebounds, just over an assist, just over a block, and 31.8% from 3 on 0.9 attempts a game. Great free throw shooter, 80%, 2.2 attempts a game, and was really good from 2, 52.7% there. So it does a lot of things really well. You'd like to see that 3-point percentage and volume come up some to kind of get to where Harrison was. But let's keep in mind, Harrison's 3-point percentage coming into Carolina wasn't that great last year either. I will say, as somebody that watches a whole lot of college basketball, because of not only my role here on Locked On Tar Heels, but also Locked On College Basketball, I saw Kentucky play a lot this year. And so I saw Adou Thiero a lot this year. Similar to Harrison Ingram, to me, Adou Thiero does a lot of winning things for his team. If they need some scoring, he'll do that. If it's rebounding, block shots, getting out in transit, whatever it is, Adou Thiero is the kind of guy that's willing to go out and just make it happen. And it's interesting to me as you look at him and what he projects to be, all these kind of things. His freshman year, Thiero didn't play a ton for Kentucky. And so I kind of even thought like he might have left after his freshman year, especially with the freshman class coming in that it was at Kentucky, a wildly heralded incoming freshman class, plus all these 7-footers. And it's like, where's Thiero going to fit for Kentucky in 23-24? Is he going to play some 3? Will he play some foot? We don't know. But given what they had on their rosters, like I just don't know. And the other thing with Thiero is that he's not a stereotypical Kentucky 5-star guy. Depending on what recruiting site you looked at, he was either a 3 or 4-star player. Typically a guy you look at Kentucky and's like, oh, why are you going to Kentucky? You're never going to see the floor. But this dude was out there a lot last year. I love that. It's not just and this is not intended as a slight to other Kentucky players, but it's a dude that's had to work really hard to find that time in the Kentucky roster. A little bit of nitty gritty on what he does at the rim. He finishes, is 55% field goal percentage at the rim. 68% of his field goal attempts come from there. So just north of 2/3. I like that. It means he's attacking, getting into the rim, and finishing there. An interesting other strength, you think about Harrison Ingram this year as kind of a small ball four. Again, Thiero would be that same mold. Had a 5.3% block rate this year. You might recall he had 4 of them against Carolina alone. That was the 6th best block rate in the entire SEC last year. And he did that as a 6'8" guy. That tells you a lot. I like his ability to get out in transition. Very efficient there, just over 1.2 points per possession. He has extremely high-level athleticism, great defensive skills. There's a lot that he could bring. Again, just does a lot of winning things. He's not going to blow you away when you look at his stats. And someone's like, wow, this dude's pouring in 16 points a game. 40% from outside. No, but there's so many varieties of things that he does well. And again, in comparing him to could he step in and do what Harrison Ingram did last year, similar to Harrison Ingram, there's some good NBA draft upside for Thiero. For me, a great year in a new place puts him in really potentially strong first round discussion for the 2025 NBA draft. An area of difference, though, I think, from Harrison Ingram is Thiero, and go watch his tape if you don't believe me, is a more athletic, more above the rim version of Harrison Ingram. And there are things that Harrison does better than Thiero as well. But in terms of athleticism, which is an area Carolina's always looking to get more athletic, faster, run, all that, Thiero brings that to the table, and I love that possibility. Also, there have been some key moments last year where some of his biggest games were against some of the biggest teams. Against Kansas, 16 points, 13 rebounds. That was at a point in the season, though, to be fair, before Big Zvonimir Ivisic came in, when I think Ugana Onyenso was still hurt, another one of their 7-footers, but also had a really big game when they played Gonzaga back in February. And so Thiero doesn't shy away from the moment, isn't, a guy that some guys disappear in big games, not Thiero. I love it. In terms of his shot, we talked about his 3-point shooting. It looks like he is coming pretty low. Maybe there's a little bit of a hitch sometime, but the mechanics overall look pretty good to me. The ball seems to come out of his hand well. I think the 3-point, the capability from the 3-point line can be strong. Now, with everything I like about Thiero, it is important for us to catch this. He has declared for the NBA draft this year and kept open the possibility of returning to school. So why are we talking about him? Well, first off, remember I quoted off the top from Inside Carolina, Carolina's made contact with him. So it's important for us to know who Carolina's talking to and what they might bring to the table. But also, I think ultimately Thiero comes back to school this year, despite the fact that it is a bit of a weaker draft as we talk about. I think there's more for him to show at the collegiate level and then try for next year. So I ultimately think he'll come back. As for declaring for the draft and leaving open the potential of coming back and being in the transfer portal, he did that before John Calipari left Kentucky. So something to just be aware of is now that Kentucky has hired their new coach, Mark Pope, is there the potential for him to return to Kentucky next year? Absolutely. Absolutely there is. In fact, my understanding is that Mark Pope is meeting with Big Zvonimir Ivisic, who we just talked about, on Monday morning, today, immediately after his press conference. Thiero posted something of like a UK logo, I think probably from their locker room or something, right after that press conference. Doesn't say anything, it doesn't say a lot, it doesn't say a little, it might say nothing, but just something to have noted. His direct quote was, "While I'm declaring for the draft while keeping all of my options open, including a return to Kentucky." So that is very much on the table. And while, as we've said, Carolina might be in good position with him if it comes to that, it's also worth noting that there are a ton of schools who have contacted him and want to reach out. So just be aware of all of those things. I want to give you the whole context of what's going on. But even though there's a bunch of schools, Thiero should take a good look at what Harrison Ingram was for Carolina this past year. And if I'm him, I would be going bug-eyed and goo-goo gaga over the potential of that role where I would be featured in a lot of ways. Because at Kentucky, he probably still would not be, because who knows what Mark Pope's roster is going to look like next year. But the role at Carolina, he's seen it, he knows what it is, and he can go do it. So I really like what Harrison Ingram did for Carolina last year. It's a great role, and I hope he reprises it because I love him as a Tar Heel, love what he brings to the table. But if not, I do like Adou, and I think Thiero could come in and do a great job for Carolina. So we'll keep our eyes on it.